never felt this. 11:59, don't make me wait.
What are you doing at my rehearsal?
All right, we are back on Play It Forward. Today we have Cameron S. Mitchell, filmmaker. The film we're going to be talking about is 𝘒𝘳𝘺𝘺, and Cameron wrote and directed 𝘒𝘳𝘺𝘺. Cameron, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I am as well looking forward to talking to you about 𝘒𝘳𝘺𝘺. It tackles one of the most difficult conversations in America, racism, prejudice, and it does it from a fresh perspective. And before we discuss the film, can you introduce yourself and the storyline any way you'd like?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a filmmaker, director, writer, cinematographer, and I, to this point in my career, as a director, I've primarily made films about disability. I am not apparently disabled. I have a spinal cord injury. I'm also neurodivergent, among other disabilities. And I find that disability has a really effective way of kind of navigating different perspectives because it doesn't have boundaries. It's not bound by an ethnicity or a culture. Anyone can experience disability at any point in their lives. And so 𝘒𝘳𝘺𝘺 is a kind of intersectional look at some of these themes. And so we do tackle racism, among other themes, relationships from different cultures, different cultural backgrounds. And I like those complicated areas. I kind of gravitate towards things that we might shy away from or be afraid of addressing in
I
some
love
way.
that. I love it. You know, before we are talking about the film, disability is so interesting to explore because in my perspective, in some way, we're all disabled. We all have had a trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, that has happened to us in one point in our lives, and it's stunted our expression or our ability to express. And we have to relearn how to do something or unlearn what is not
Right.
working for us.
Or it enabled us to creatively navigate the world in a different way that we
Exactly.
didn't know before.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's really another facet of the conversation where we start talking about creativity, because oftentimes the creative process, those blocks that we have, those limitations, whether it's money, in short film, like that's the first one that's obvious, or, location or actors or time or blah, 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 whatever those things are, especially when we get down to the edit, because it's so easy in the edit, oh, I don't have that shot. I don't have, we, those limitations, those boundaries help guide that creative process in a way that when we overcome them, we're like, whoa, I could have never, invented this. I could have never thought of it myself. And you've arrived at something really beautiful. And that, going back to what you're saying, is like, being disabled and navigating the world and overcoming that challenge in a way that you're meeting your needs, is, a heightened level of awareness, which is, the artistic process. So that said, can you just briefly mention the storyline for those who haven't seen it, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, everything you just said is so true. I have like five different comments about,
Go, go.
okay. Yeah. I mean, cinema in cinematic, film history, kind of has taught us a certain way of viewing bodies, of viewing humanity. And so I actually started working in film before I made my first narrative short and wrote it and directed it. And I feel like I have a responsibility as a filmmaker to kind of start trying to put these films out there and also to identify myself as disabled even because I think that we get a little uncomfy with it. We get uncomfy with the subject. And the only way to kind of destigmatize and make us more comfortable is to start seeing more representations of disability on the screen in front of and behind the camera and understand how that perspective shapes a film. Because we think we've seen disability, but a lot of films can be pretty harmful in their portrayals of disability because there weren't any disabled people behind the camera or in the writer's room or saying, hey, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe we should try this different idea. And being 1 in 4 in the American population is disabled. I think it's pretty incredible that we've gotten to this point without, you know, meaningful and inclusive representation that very vividly and deeply reflects lived disabled experience. And I think that film has a responsibility to disabled people in this way, in part because film has played such a strong role in constructing its image over time, over US history and world history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be a little more specific in what I hear you say is that, traditionally, with some exceptions that we could probably come up with, 90% or more of leading men and leading women are pretty and able-bodied and, exceptionally photogenic. And, that has created its own effect for the American masses, which try to live up to some representation of competing with that, whether it's magazines or film. But it's the image of what we think we should aspire to.
Right. Yeah, we've kind of we've created a cult of celebrity that encourages, impossible visions of beauty and perfection. And beauty is so much more than that. I think we're starting to see films that represent different forms of beauty, different versions of beauty. And, it was really exciting to get to kind of contribute to that with 𝘒𝘺𝘺𝘺, because 𝘒𝘒𝘺𝘺𝘺 is a film that's starring 𝘂𝑚𝑒, who's a famous R&B singer. So she's had a bit of that lived experience of being a performer, being in front of the camera, and Ryan Lane, who's an incredibly talented actor. He was in Switched at Birth, among other things. So getting to work with these two stout professionals in their respective fields, and so in 𝘒𝘺𝘺𝘺, Imani and Alex are old flames that connect over the course of one night at a concert in the distant past. And then years and years later, they're reconnected. And Imani has a secret that she's been keeping from Alex that relates to that night that they met. So the short film kind of unfolds during the disclosure of this secret, and the kind of rekindling of this old flame.
Great segue. Thank you. It's I really appreciate you saying beauty and the perception of beauty, because that's really what it boils down to. What we perceive as beautiful, and beautiful beauty is much more expansive than a really handsome symmetrical face. And which ultimately allows us to accept ourselves as we are and see ourselves as beautiful and contribute that into the world. And we're all so influenced, whether when we know it and we don't know it, and we grow up and we try to work through it to find our own unique kind of self-expression, which is beautiful. It's great, like the whole thing, even with all its trials and tribulations. I was thinking of myself, just partly a tangent, but how in our culture, seemingly to me, I recently had a thought. I'm noticing these conversations, and conversations sound kind of have this clipped manner, as though people are delivering a punchline with everything they say. I'm like, where is that coming from? And I'm like, oh man, it's the sitcoms. It's the years and years of sitcoms. I don't know if this is my just hypothesis, just throwing this out there, but whether that's true or not, we are influenced, and those influences take away from the truth of who we are. And so seeking to champion that voice as an artist is the core of our evolutionary process as individuals, as if not humanity, right? That is what we are doing. And that's what great art is doing, the seeking to explore itself. So to segue into, I mean, we've talked deeply about where the inspiration of this is coming from you. Have we left anything out in terms of your passion for this topic?
You know, I think we've talked a good amount about it. I would just add that, in the mainstream, we're given these perceptions and visions of beauty, and that doesn't have to be like that. And I think we're realizing that in social media is really having a moment right now. There's a kind of renaissance going on the internet of people taking and reclaiming their own narratives, realizing that we don't have to let Hollywood tell this story about us without us, basically. And so *Kryptonite* really is a film that's trying to do that from the perspective of an interracial relationship and interabled relationship. We have Alex, who's played by Ryan Lane, who is capital D deaf. His character is capital D deaf, which basically means he does not use any kind of aid, hearing aid, or assistive device or cochlear implant. And we have Imani, who's played by Shanice. And Shanice has an experience growing up as African American and as a singer who, in her actual life, as the R&B singer Shanice, has achieved lots of success. And so getting to incorporate the way my process works, I come from documentary and narrative. So I really like incorporating bits of reality pieces from the lives of the performers and their characters. And so in making this film, we drew heavily kind of from the background of both of these individuals. And that is where you kind of get this delicious intersection and interpretation of things, right? Because you don't necessarily have to be yourself. I often kind of am jealous of performers because it's like they get to kind of act out these characters, pretend they're not themselves. But also, we all know that there are bits of them that are in this. And so, it reminds me of films like The Killing Fields, and kind of reinterpretations or reenactments where you get to experience something with the kind of assistance of a film camera. Kind of recreating,
Yeah,
reenacting,
yeah,
reinterpreting life.
yeah. I love that. I'm totally into that. And I think, that filmmakers hearing this really like espouse the idea of taking documentary circumstances and scripting a narrative around that because it creates such more realism and it lowers the production value and the barrier to entry as well into the filmmaking world. They both
And
have
I would,
such,
I would
yeah,
also just
yeah,
add,
please.
I'm heavily inspired by filmmakers like Ingmar Bergman. His film Persona has a great impact on me. And if you're not familiar with Persona, it's this relationship between this caretaker and this now disabled actress. And you get to see them play themselves in some way. If you follow Bergman's career, he's very kind
Mm,
of
mm,
invested in these
mm,
the real and
mm,
the interpreted, like the
mm,
person on screen and the person off screen.
mm,
And so Kryptonite, while not nearly as surreal as a Bergman film, is very much dealing with that
mm.
cross translation from screen, off screen to
Mm,
on screen.
Thank you. Um, they both have such vulnerable performances, and Ryan's part, particularly where it caught me off guard to a certain extent, is when he raises his voice, and that's such a moment where you can really, as an audience, hear something that you're not accustomed to. I'm not accustomed to. I didn't grow up with a deaf capital D friend or family member, so you hear that and the stark difference, between quote unquote non-orally aorally disabled person. And so it's just new, it's different, the ear catches it and it catches your heart, it just hits you in the heart. And you have just sort of inkling around what this person has had to face. And I love how you said experience, because it is the experience of being Black or African American. It is the experience of being deaf with a capital D. It is the experience of all these things, all these painful things that make us who we are, especially when we address them, head on and acknowledge them. So, in terms of yourself now as the viewer and the creator, you are both the viewer and the creator coming to this movie, seeing this movie, when you see it, when you take it in, how does it hit your heart? What is the meaning and message for you?
Yeah, for me, I think that we're constantly struggling with kind of identity and what something means to us, what we choose to identify as, what we put forward as ourselves. And in this film, when I watch it, the moment that really gets me is the the car scene, because and it's the development from the couch to the car, because you have this progressive heightening of an argument, which we're all familiar with. But then you have the realization, the denouement moment, and the performances are just so stellar in this. It's honestly nonverbal for me. This moment is this shared moment between Shanice and Ryan Lane when they're looking at each other through the car window. But then when playing Alex comes into the car, it's there's a or sorry, rather, let me go back. When Shanice comes into the car with Ryan, there's this moment of crossover that we're so familiar with in relationships. It's that moment of determination when you decide to come back to the table in spite of the pain, in spite of the struggle, in spite of the million and one differences that you can name right now. And they're so far from each other in that moment when they're almost, yelling at each other through the car window. And so that physical space, entering that space, coming together, and then sharing this moment, like that's what the film embodies. It's a pacing, it's a representation of relationships and how maybe relationships, like really close ones, can help our understanding of how to reach across, how to reach out, and how to touch somebody else, whether or not they might be our significant other or a friend or a stranger on the street. Making that decision to cross that divide and to invite somebody into your space, or to make the assumption and to enter that space,
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear that, and that inspires me to think, the film is between the characters who completely accept each other's differences. I mean, there's nothing there that's dividing them in terms of, physical circumstances. Their riff is an element of betrayal, right? The character played by Ryan feels betrayed because he should have known something she didn't tell him, and she didn't tell him out of, you know, whether it was in her mind for his own good or not. She didn't tell him. And so they both are able to come together when, like you said, no matter what, you're still coming to the table to forgive. You're still willing to listen to each other. And both people, one is seeking forgiveness and the other is forgiving. And that is what is uniting them. And in the moment where she gets out of the car, he has the impulse to run to her. He hands her an object and she says, well, why don't you deliver this object to the person that's needed to. She's welcoming him back in and affirming his needs. So here they are, two people that have these needs that are not being met by the circumstances surrounding their lives. They're okay with it. Then they have an issue where they don't meet their own needs, or she doesn't meet his needs. They come back together by acknowledging each other and then working to meet each other's needs. And that ultimately is the formula for reconciliation, right? When we acknowledge that we have needs and we're going to work to meet those needs because we care about one another.
Yeah. I I think it's a universal experience, but we all arrive at this moment at different points, or we may never arrive. And families can play a significant part in that. You know, the people around you can guide you and maybe not deceive you, but lead you, because they're the people that you share your world experience with, your understanding of the world. And so that moment of breaking away, and breaking that path of repeated trauma, whatever, the everything that you had going on in your life. That's what we see in this film. That's the moment that we see Shanice go through. And that's the moment that we see Ryan decide to reach across and reach out. Because obviously, you know, Ryan playing Alex's character and Ryan, both, they've experienced all of this repeatedly. So they're no strangers to having to reach out in the face of adversity, right? So all of that kind of interplays in this relationship. And a lot of it, honestly, you just have to watch the film to understand. Like there's something about performance that just can capture something that you can't fully quite verbalize.
Absolutely. Cameron, since making this movie, how have you been changed as a person?
So making this film was a different experience for me because it was a highly collaborative effort. I usually wear a lot of or all of the hats on my projects. And that's just out of necessity as an independent filmmaker. Having to be the camera operator, the DP, the director, the writer, because no one else is going to make your film for you, right? You're told this, like you are the most passionate representative of your filmmaking. You know, but I've also joined the union because of that. I'm a part of the International Cinematographers Guild. You know, I've forged a career as a camera operator and DP as well as a director. So I'm very thankful for the experience of a film in being an indie filmmaker, teaching me to wear all these hats. This film, 𝘒𝘺𝘺𝘺, though, what it taught me is that you have to make a leap to collaborate, and it's kind of a trust fall. It's kind of also just getting out of your own boundaries, your own comfort, your own familiar experiences of how you know to make something, and working with other people that share a vision, an idea of what you would like to make, but you might not fully know what that is yet, even. So, you know, working with Penny Wilson, who's an EP on this film and a writer, Joshua Friedman, who's a writer, David Zimmerman, who's a producer and writer, you know, Crystal, we had a huge team on this. It was highly collaborative and a lot of people in the room. And I kind of like love that. And I feel like every film I make now is kind of evolving a different but slightly similar puzzle of how do we get more people into the room? How do we get more perspectives on this and make everyone feel involved and included in the shaping of this thing? Because ultimately that's what film is, right? It takes a village to make it. And you know, as we've come to realize, it's not all about the director, right? Everybody, all crew members kind of deserve a piece of ownership in the film and making the film. Everybody is kind of quintessential to making it happen.
Absolutely.
And it's not just saying that to virtue signal, like they quite literally do. And so 𝘒𝘺𝘺𝘺 taught me to keep doing that, to keep pushing myself and challenging myself and working with new people, because it's only going to get better. It's going to only evolve your understanding of yourself and of others.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. You know, as a follow-up to that, how do you find what is it that guides you through those conversations that are difficult with co-collaborators where the visions split or even some of the technical ideas split? How do you make that leap of trust fall and try it when it's right to try it? And how do you stand your ground and say, you know, we're going to try it this way? How do you navigate that really sensitive line?
Well, you know, difference is going to happen, especially when you get a bunch of people in the same room, and in particular, disabled people. If you're trying to represent or include disabled people, you can't possibly include all of them effectively and right the first time. It's a learning process and experience. So actually, I find the biggest kind of enforcer of, the vision is to just constantly be open to modeling like that. We don't know exactly everything that's going on here, and while this can sound chaotic, right? You think of hierarchy in film and how everything is top down. I actually always struggled with that as a young PA on sets. I didn't like how people were withholding information, and sometimes to the detriment, I felt like, of the entire crew. Like if we all had this information, we could all be on the same page and better do our jobs. But unfortunately, I think that's the way a lot of the film industry is structured. It's very hierarchical, it's very top down. And so we don't know what it's like to direct a project that has opened the room, or we don't know what it's like to be on those projects. So I really strive to create that space on every one of my sets. And I'm not always going to succeed, and there's going to be, failures along the way, but that's filmmaking, right? You have to be open to failure.
Yeah.
That's what makes you a better filmmaker.
Yeah.
That's what enables you to keep going. If you aren't open to failure, you'll stop. You'll stop doing what you're doing. You'll stop making, because you'll have a setback so big you feel like you can't go forward. So being open to failure, I think, is the biggest piece that I get out of directing in some way,
Yeah.
because you do have a vision, you do know where it's going, but you also have to be open and hear when it's not working for someone else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful advice. I mean, especially, the way I take it is, it's so important to have an acknowledgement and a sense of the unknown, and to bring the unknown into the room. And as if, hey, unknown, do your stuff, do your magic. We're gonna risk it. We're gonna risk failure. We're gonna risk ridicule. We're gonna risk whatever it is needed to risk. And I think you're right in that atmosphere and that openness that you as a director model. I think it's more it allows people to espouse that for themselves and say, okay, well, I'm going to have this idea. I don't know either. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Bringing the unknown into the room, bringing that he who shall not be named, or that thing that
Yeah.
should not be
Yeah.
named, right, into the room. And that's
Yeah.
really, you can see it in Kryptonite. Kryptonite itself is a film that kind of results from this process. And the storyline of Kryptonite itself is about addressing that elephant in the room. And so we lived that on set. That was a part of our production process, as well as our narrative and story crafting process.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron. Cameron S. Mitchell, filmmaker. The film is Kryptonite. You wrote it, you directed it. We look forward to seeing more of your stuff. Thank you so much for a great conversation. I really appreciate your insight into all of it. Till next time, we're going to play it forward. Peace out. Thanks, Cameron.
Thanks.
Bye.